Hello, Happies. How you been doing, Happy Innovators? Happy Holidays, you happy innovators. It's that time of year again. So, I'm sitting here at my desk, getting ready to do my Singularity podcast, and I had this idea, okay, that I would do a podcast today that wasn't just about one thing, you know? Like maybe what I'll try to do for this episode of the Singularity podcast is share a few different talking points with you, okay? So, I sit down at my desk with my cup of coffee right here, take a sip. Oh, man. And I thought I would share with you a little kind of like secret, or maybe just something I stumbled across probably about a year ago in my studio. A little technical suggestion, okay? Now, if you're a musician who records at home and you perform the music yourself and everything, okay? And let's just say for the sake of discussion that you're not a drummer, okay? So you never went out and invested, thousands of dollars into a drum set, nor could you, okay? Let's say you're a musician on a budget, okay? Well, I'm going to share with you a little trick that I figured out about a year ago, or maybe 2 years ago now. I was working on a track I have called Walking the Wall. It's a PC3 song, released on Creative Commons or whatever. And with this particular idea, Walking the Wall, it was one of those 24-hour songs that I've done where I start the song, right when I wake up in the morning, adding music and everything. And then, around supper time, I stop working on the tracks. Like, whatever has been recorded by supper time, that's it. That's all the tracks for the song. And then I'll go eat supper, and then I'll come back and I'll edit what I have into a finished piece of music. Like a really quick process, 24 hours, So with this particular idea, I'm sitting there, right? And I had this idea. I have a pair of brushes, metal brushes, that I use for my drums, right? And I have them at my desk. And I usually, when I'm recording an idea, I like to keep notes. Like I write down things in case I need to go back in time and redo something again or something like that. Like I just kind of keep like little notes as I go along. So I always have like a notebook on my desk. So I'm sitting there thinking, I'm holding these brushes in my hand, and I just got this idea, like what if I played my desk, instead of a drum set on a song, okay, which is normal. What if I just played my desk? And I started to hit around. I found that my lamp that's above my desk has a pretty good bell sound. Okay, so just kind of screwing around, but most importantly, what I came across was if I hit my notebook on my desk with these metal brushes, okay, it gives me a really nice like snare sound. Okay, now like almost like a marching snare, right? A really tight, high sense kind of sound, but it's a rhythm being played manually, Get what I mean? It may not seem like a big deal, but it kind of just gave me that idea, like of playing with found sounds, like not always resorting to my drum set, stepping off of it, and playing, inanimate objects, That's a lamp, What a cool sound. The screen on my computer, my actual desktop, more of a bass drum sound. So, and here's my recording interface. So if I'm alternating between the notebook and my interface, I kind of can get some pretty cool rhythms going. I'm sure you can hear what I mean now. I can even slow it down. Hear that? That's my brushes rubbing across my notebook. A little bit of information I thought I'd share with all you starving artists and musicians, like me, who are maybe kind of like looking for something new to try out. This is something I would recommend. You don't need to go out and buy $1,000 worth of drums necessarily. You can get away with playing simple things like your notebook or your desk. All you need to do is go out and maybe buy a couple of these brushes that I have a pair of ProMark accent brushes with metal brushes on them, and they're really comfortable to play, and they're really inexpensive. And you'd be surprised at how many times since I recorded Walking the Wall with my notebook drumming, how many times I've, on a whim, picked these things up and just started going around the room, You know what I'm saying? Okay, enough of that. Enough of playing around with that. It's Christmas, right? It's Christmas. And this morning when my wife and I woke up, we were just talking about the holiday season and, what it means for her and her job and work. And, there's all these parties and all this stuff going on, all this hoopla. And there's gift exchanges and stuff like that. And, like I mentioned last year, okay, there's a certain amount of, pressure that comes with the holiday season, to reciprocate gift giving and generosity and things like that, right? And while we're talking, I just couldn't help but think about this, that we celebrate Christmas really like all over the world, right? And I kind of feel like, the reason we celebrate Christmas is we're celebrating the birth of Jesus. That's what we're celebrating. And it's kind of funny in a way to me, because not everybody believes in Jesus. Okay? But pretty much everybody celebrates Christmas. You know what I'm saying? Christmas is a very popular holiday. And I don't know, I suppose you could look at it several different ways, right? You could go, Christmas is no longer just a Christian holiday. Like, especially here in the States, it's kind of been adopted as like even a secular holiday. Okay? So there's that point of view, right? I can see that. But really what we're celebrating is Christ Mass. That's Christmas. That's what we celebrate, the birth of Jesus Christ. And it doesn't surprise me that in this time we live in, that Christmas has, turned into or devolved into this holiday that celebrates materialism, which is like technically the opposite of what we're supposed to be celebrating. Okay? I don't know whether you believe in Jesus Christ or not, okay? But I do, and I believe that we're celebrating his birth. And I know there's people who go, oh, he wasn't born on the 25th of December, and you know what? Shut up. Like splitting hairs about it. It's so silly. It's like, that's the day that the planet Earth recognizes as the day that Jesus was born. It's called Christmas. Like, calm down, you know? But I've always had issue with this. Like, I don't have any problem with people professing their belief in Jesus. Okay? I don't have any problem with that. In fact, as Christians, we're kind of like encouraged to do that. Okay? To spread the word, you know, to continue the work of the apostles. Like, that's what we're taught to do, right? So if you're like an atheist or an agnostic or something, and you have some Christian guy, you know, beating you over the head with Christianity, okay, like attacking you with it and trying to convert you, you know, by force, you know, they're going to make you believe because they just have so much knowledge. I've always had kind of a problem with that. And even though I'm guilty of it to a certain degree myself in the past, probably about 20 years ago, I really stopped doing that. Okay? Because, well, one, I'm not an expert. I'm not knowledgeable enough and qualified to really debate and talk about religion and things like that. Okay? And Christianity, you know, versus atheism or something. I'm not smart enough to do that. I just don't know enough. But I've always had a problem with, even though I'm a Christian, I have a problem with a lot of the time the way that Christians try to proselytize, you know, even to like me. You know, I believe already, you know, and it becomes like this really stupid, like splitting hairs, like, you know, who knows more, you know? So I've always had a problem with that, you know, like I tune them out, and I've been reluctant to talk about spiritual things, religious things on the Singularity Podcast, not because I'm afraid to or something stupid like that. It's like because I don't need to be talking about it all the time, okay? And it's not important to me that I convince you that I'm right and you're wrong. I do think it's important to convince you of the truth and what I believe is the truth, okay? But there's a time and a place for that. And I don't know, maybe in the future or something it'll be that way, but the Singularity Podcast isn't really that kind of platform for me, okay? And it's not about me being right and you being wrong. It's about the exchange of ideas and just talking about ideas. So, having said that, you know, back to this idea of Christmas, I think it's almost kind of comical to me that even though probably, you know, like if I were to guess, maybe like, you know, 55% or 65% of the audience doesn't even believe in Jesus. For some reason, when it comes to Christmas, we all kind of like ease up a little bit and kind of just go with it, you know, because it's a pleasant, or it's supposed to be anyway, a pleasant time of year, and it brings people happiness and joy, you know, which is an interesting thought in and of itself, because even though, you know, the world may be secular or agnostic, atheist, or whatever, for some reason, that day that we celebrate and honor the birth of Jesus, regardless of what's going on in popular culture or whatever, it's still a pretty important day, it turns out, right? Christmas is still a pretty important day of the year. So think about that, you know, because I do. You know, I wanted to talk to you a little bit today, too, about when I was visiting Cleveland back in September. I sat down with my dad, okay? And I had brought all my recording gear to Ohio to interview my dad, okay? And the idea was, or at least partially, like the hope was, that I would share the interview with my dad with you on the Singularity Podcast. That my first interview would be an interview of my dad, okay? And so I'm at my parents' house, right? And I set up all of my equipment and everything, the microphones and everything. And like a complete lunkhead, like I am, I went through all the trouble of, loading up my gear, driving to Cleveland, unloading the gear, sitting my dad down, like actually getting him to just sit there and talk to me for a while on, recording, which is, nothing small either. And I forgot to hit like a certain button on my unit, which is called phantom power, and that makes the microphones work. And I didn't record anything but static. Okay, so once I realized I had made that mistake, all right, and I had lost my opportunity of this interview with my dad, and my mom too, but mostly my dad, okay, I had another opportunity. Okay, I had one more chance. So what I decided to do was just take my iPod, okay, no other recording gear or anything, and just video my dad and record him talking, okay? So I have a video and I would have an audio. And, the idea was that I would eventually at least share the audio with you on the Singularity Podcast, right? Well, I'm asking my dad all these questions, like questions about like when each one of his children were born, like what do you remember when the oldest was born? What do you remember when the second oldest was born, my sister, and what do you remember, blah, 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 etc., etc. You get what I'm talking about. And my dad is like playing along, he's answering questions and he's, it's going really great, okay? Well, we were at my oldest brother's house, okay? And for one reason or another, I'm not sure, but I don't think he realized that I was filming my dad and kind of like interviewing my dad. So my brother starts kind of like chiming into this conversation. And I'm like, oh, okay. It's cool that you want to talk and all that, and you want to be part of the conversation, but I'm doing a thing here, and my brother is just like walking all over it, and my dad is kind of a quiet guy, and my brother is like, not a loudmouth, but, he's an extrovert. So, I'm asking my dad a question and my brother starts answering what he remembers, okay? And my dad winds up kind of just like sitting there listening to my brother talk. And okay, I'll admit it kind of pissed me off a little bit, okay? Because this was my last opportunity to really get a chance to interview my dad the way I had envisioned, right? And it just went right in the toilet, opportunity lost. And I had actually done a Singularity podcast about this particular situation, and it was one of the podcasts that I decided to not share with you, okay, because the topic was kind of negative. I was a little cheesed that my brother had, just walked all over this interview. It was going so well. It was so cool. And, it would have been great to have a record of my dad talking, about these stories, that his experience as my dad, the father of my family, like getting his take on everything, right? Not so much. It didn't happen. So I decided to not share that Singularity podcast with you, but I did decide today that I wanted to explain a little bit of that to you. So I don't have to share the episode, but you can kind of get the tone. I was a little bit disappointed, to say the least. Okay. But I love my brother, I'm not angry or anything like that. We're cool, because he'll probably listen to this, But, damn, it was just such a really unfortunate loss of opportunity. Okay. So, another thing I wanted to talk about today, which is pretty interesting, okay? I don't know what it's like where you live, okay? But in the United States, marijuana, okay, the drug marijuana, Mary Jane or pot, dope, whatever you want to call it, is illegal, okay, except for in a handful of states. Now, there are only like 2 or 3 out of the 50 states on the continental United States that have legalized marijuana, okay, either for medical use or recreational use or whatever. Well, okay, the reason I'm bringing it up is because about a year or 2 ago, marijuana was finally made legal. Okay, the prohibition on marijuana was lifted in Massachusetts. And about a year and a half, 2 years later, the first legal marijuana dispensaries have opened and are selling marijuana legally in the state of Massachusetts. And there's a lot of people who are against it. There are a lot of people who are for it. I personally feel that it's an interesting experiment. Anytime that a prohibition can be lifted, because I don't believe in prohibition, really. It's a sticky wicket, but I guess I kind of feel like, I'm a libertarian. I'm a centrist. I believe in personal autonomy. And I believe that a person should be able to decide for themselves whether they want to take a drug or not. I don't think that it should necessarily be illegal. That it should be something, if you're of age, over 21 or something, that you should be able to pretty much try whatever you want to. You should be free to try whatever you want to. Now, I understand the downsides to that as well, but for the sake of this discussion, we'll kind of keep it like this. Like, I'm just kind of fascinated, and I'm kind of proud in some ways of the state of Massachusetts, not because marijuana is, finally legal here, okay, but because a prohibition has been decided to be lifted. And I think that that's more important than any specific, prohibited substance. You know what I mean? It's more important that exercise of freedom and autonomy is more important than the drug itself. So there you go. I thought I would share that with you because I'm watching it play out now. It's kind of an interesting thing to watch, and I'm just personally, I'm very proud that prohibition has been lifted. So there you go. And here's another thing I wanted to talk about. First, I'm going to take a sip of my coffee here. This is kind of like a Hodge Podge, Singularity Podcast today. I'm just kind of going with whatever I have in my head. So I hope you don't mind. It's, hopping from one thing to the next, but, it's kind of like a news report, or like an editorial. Anyway, coffee time. Hold on. Okay, that is like the best cup of coffee I've ever had. And I think I'm going to take another sip. Oh my gosh, is that good? Maybe you should grab a cup too. Because we might be here for a little while. Anyway, so, my wife and I go shopping a lot at Walmart. Now, I'm pretty sure that Walmart is a global store, so you probably have one near you, or you've probably been to one or something, no matter where you are in the world. At least that's my understanding. But it's kind of funny because Walmart has this reputation of like selling crap. Like everything you buy at Walmart is like crap because it's inexpensive and it's cheap. It doesn't cost much money, and usually the reason why it's so inexpensive is because it's kind of like of lower quality or crappy, right? But I gotta tell you, speaking from experience, that is a myth. Okay, a lot of the stuff that you can buy at Walmart is actually pretty good, and it's inexpensive. So don't listen to the naysayers all the time, because my experience has been like, I buy a pair of sweatpants or something to work out in. Let's say I bought a pair in like 2006, okay, to exercise in, and I'm still wearing them. Like they're still in great shape. And I've beat the hell out of these things, but they still, they're still intact. And I've bought more expensive, name brand workout clothing, right? And it just got shredded, and there's my handy dandy, Walmart sweatpants and sweatshirt, tank tops, whatever, still holding up. So go figure. There's some food for thought. Don't listen to the naysayers. But anyway, so my wife and I were heading out to Walmart, right? And the snow had fallen and everything, and like the plows had come through. And this is a while ago. This is maybe a few years ago. And it was so funny because we noticed that as we're pulling into Walmart, into the parking lot, there's like this little island, this little median that separates the entrance. Like you have a left side and a right side. So there's incoming traffic going one way and outgoing traffic going the other way. And there's this little concrete like slab kind of thing, little island in the middle, right? I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. Well, there was a sign, okay, like in this cement, in this little island, and it kind of said, go this way, go that way. It was a street sign stuck right in the cement, a pole sticking out with this sign on it, okay? But apparently when the snow plows had come through that parking lot to clean out that parking lot, whoever was plowing that parking lot had absolutely no regard for that median, for that little concrete island, right? And they just mowed right over this sign. Okay, so on this median, you have this metal sign, but it's bent all the way down to the ground, And I just thought it was so funny. It just looked so funny. But it got me to thinking, didn't the guy who was plowing that, know that there was a sign sticking up and that he probably shouldn't, run over it? Well, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he or she really couldn't see it, right? But the net result was, this flattened sign. And, I remember asking my dad, speaking of my dad, I remember asking my dad a while ago, like a few years ago, just in a random conversation. I'm like, hey, Dad, let me ask you a question. Do you think that, since you were my age, okay, from the time you were, let's say, 47 or maybe even younger, like 35, okay? My father's about 82 right now. In between that time, would you say, from your experience, that people have gotten smarter, okay? Or have they actually gotten stupider, okay? And without hesitation, okay, without even having to think about it, he just blurted out, stupider, people have gotten stupider. And we wound up, musing on that for a while and talking about it, but I gotta be honest, I couldn't help but think about that conversation when I looked and I saw that sign just like flattened on that median, okay, it might sound harsh, but maybe it's like this, the more that time goes by, let's just say, hypothetically, maybe people are actually dumbing down, like actually getting stupider. And there used to be a time, okay, when there was like a standard. There used to be a time when there were standards, and they weren't necessarily very high standards, but, you know, they kind of kept everything intact in our civilization, right? But if you pay really close attention, okay, to little things like the plow just flattening that sign, and you keep your eyes open for those kinds of things that, things that are broken or going in the wrong direction or something, and no one says or does anything about it anymore. It doesn't even matter anymore. Like, the standards are so much lower now that you can flatten a sign at the Walmart entrance and nobody will do anything about it. They'll just leave it like that, okay? Because it's still flattened, okay? Like, nobody even went out and tried to, like, you know, bend it back up. It's still flattened, right? So it speaks to this era that, you know, is worrisome to a certain degree, I suppose. That probably sounds really snotty, right? But it's like, you know, because it's not like I'm like Mr. Intelligent, you know. I'm not like super smart. I'm guilty of extremely stupid things myself. Okay, I'm not proud of it, but it's true. I am. I'm human. But I do have standards. And I think they are a little bit higher than that. Okay? Like paying attention to something like that, you know. Do you know what I mean? You may or may not. I don't know. It's kind of a negative thing to say. So make of that whatever you want. But Walmart's not so bad. How's that? We'll stay positive. Walmart is not so bad. You know, another thing I wanted to talk about today. Let me get a sip of coffee again here. Oh, man. Another thing I wanted to talk about was the fact that the holidays are coming around, right? You know, we had Thanksgiving and we have Christmas coming up, New Year's, and think for a moment how important food is to the holiday season, right? Like, really, the essence of gathering with people, usually, you know, at all times, is really at the center of every family gathering, okay, is this idea of sharing food. And food is like a huge part of the holidays, you know? And it's something that I don't spend a particularly, you know, large amount of time thinking about, but it is worth pausing for a moment and just at least thinking about it, and maybe even talking about it a little. You know, this idea of good food, you know? Do you ever think about that? Like, how fortunate we are to have, like, good food, you know, a favorite food. I don't know what your favorites are, but I got a handful myself, right? And I remember a while ago I was watching this biography, or this documentary about Michael Hutchence from In Excess, who's one of my favorite singers. I just think he was a great singer, a legend. But, you know, he was in an accident, or he was like, you know, he had gotten injured somehow, either like in a bicycle accident or like in a fight or something. And he hit his head really hard, okay? Hard enough to lose his sense of taste. And man, I have thought about that, you know, countless times. Just that, what What a horrible tragedy, right? Can you imagine going through life without taste buds, without being able to taste food? It's like absolutely terrible, isn't it? But that can happen, so I guess a note to self, like we should all be grateful and thankful that we can, one, taste food, right? But probably for the most part, most of us have access, maybe not on a regular basis, but maybe on a semi-regular basis, we have access to really, really delicious, excellent food, And just think about how much people take that for granted. If that were ever taken away, I don't take it for granted. I have some favorites, man. Food is one of the best things about life, isn't it? The opportunity and the idea of like eating delicious food, What are some of your favorites? Let me think. What are some of my favorites? Okay. What do I love? Well, everybody loves pizza, right? Pizza is like a staple. I mean, everybody just loves pizza. And hamburgers, the basic things. And, like a really great hamburger. Have you ever had a really great hamburger? Like, you can have hamburgers, from all different kinds of places. But did you ever find a hamburger in a restaurant or a place somewhere? And you're just like, this is the best damn hamburger I have ever had in my life. Like, this is delicious. It's kind of hard to go wrong with a hamburger if you're cooking one or whatever, but every once in a while you'll have one and it's like, wow, that is really good. Or, it's really kind of, hit or miss with pizza, but every once in a while, oh man, you'll find a place who makes pizza just like, oh, it's so good. Do you know what I mean? Think about that, Like right now, if you could eat anything in the world right now, what would you be eating? And I would have to say that if I could eat anything right now, it would be two things. One, a Roman burger from Mr. Hero sandwich shop in Cleveland, Ohio, okay? You can't get those anywhere else. You can only get them in Cleveland, which is tragic, but the best sandwich you will ever have in your life is a Roman burger from Mr. Hero, okay? And the second thing I would have would be a Reuben, a corned beef sandwich with sauerkraut and Thousand Island dressing from Nate's Deli in Cleveland, Ohio, where I grew up. Two things you can't get anywhere else, but oh my gosh, let me tell you something. I've tried a lot of Reubens all over the continental United States, okay? And I can tell you with certainty that the best corned beef sandwich I've ever had was from Nate's Deli in Cleveland, Ohio. I used to eat them all the time when I was a kid because it was really close to where I worked. And oh my gosh. Every time I go back to Cleveland, there's two things I gotta have. A Roman burger and a Reuben from Nate's Deli with a side order of mozzarella sticks because they made the most killer mozzarella sticks there. I'm getting hungry just even thinking about this stuff. But those are a couple of my favorites. Feel free to, comment and share what your favorites are. Good food, the holidays and good food, Can you imagine? It's just without taste buds or, what a horrible turn of events, But anyway, what else did I want to talk about today? Really quick. You know what I wanted to talk about? Well, let me get my sip of coffee here. I have a loyal listener of the Singularity Podcast, okay? And him and I have dialogued a few times, okay? And, he's been really helpful to me, actually. more than most, really, with the Singularity Podcast. He's kind of helped me along a little bit, giving me feedback, and he's a studio engineer, so he's actually given me some tips, answered my questions, because I don't know everything about recording. I'm still very much learning, and he's been very gracious and helpful with that. But over the years, having talked with this guy a few times, and we've had a back and forth a little bit, it became clear to me that he was a person who believed in aliens, and it's not that uncommon to find people that believe in the existence of extraterrestrial life and UFOs and that kind of stuff. And I've never had any problem believing in any of that stuff. Okay. However, I will say, and this is why I'm talking about it right now. I'm actually talking to this friend of mine, Stu. So Stu, if you're listening, which I know you will be, this is for you. We've had this discussion kind of like a little bit back and forth about UFOs and alien abductions and those kinds of things, right? And I guess what I want to share with you, okay, is my take on what I think is happening, okay, when someone is abducted by aliens or makes the claim of being abducted by aliens, okay? The belief or the understanding is that they are extraterrestrial, that they are actually from another planet or another galaxy, okay? I don't believe that really anymore. I do believe, though, that when people make the claim of having been abducted or seen a UFO or anything like that, those kinds of things, they are really having this experience. Okay, I believe that they are not lying, that they are telling you what they experienced. But I just don't believe that they're from another planet or another galaxy. I believe they exist. I believe people see them. I believe they abduct people. I believe all those things. I just believe that they're interdimensional, okay? That they're not from another planet. They're not extraterrestrial. That they are actually spirits, okay? That for one reason or another, however, they've been able to find a way to cross over into our dimension and, for the most part, torment people. I believe that's true. And I have a whole host of reasons why I believe that. But I wanted to share with this listener of mine my position on it. Okay, so I believe that UFOs are real. Don't have any doubt about it. These people, they tell these stories, they have these accounts of what they've experienced. They're telling the truth. They're telling you what happened. Maybe not all the time. I mean, maybe some of them are delusional or insane or something, okay? But not all of them. And I just don't believe that they're aliens. I believe that they are some kind of malevolent spirit of some kind, some kind of malevolent being that has managed to cross over into our dimension and interfere in the lives of these people, and traumatize them and scare them and torment them. It's very seldom do you ever hear a happy story about an abductee, of aliens. You hear these horrible accounts of torture and suffering. And why is that? That would be the question I have. Is like, why is it always negative? Man. So there you go, Stu. There you go. Thanks for listening to this podcast of mine for so many years now and being loyal. Thank you for that. And I know he'll probably go, aw shucks, or something like that in the comments, some kind of funny response. But seriously, thanks. You're kind of like becoming the inspiration for this podcast. You are becoming the inspiration to this podcast because you engage me you make comments, you say things, and not everybody does. That brings me to another thing I want to talk about, which has been on my mind lately, is this idea, okay, of reciprocity on the internet, okay? And you're probably thinking, reciprocity? Like, what is this guy talking about? Well, okay, reciprocity, in case you don't know, is like the idea or the act of like returning a favor or returning a kindness. Like someone does something nice for you, so you in turn do something nice for them. It's an exchange, right? You don't have to be great friends to share reciprocity. You can just be strangers who, I help you out, you help me out. We're all struggling musicians, artists, whatever we are. And, like if I'm going to dial into what you're doing, you dial into what I'm doing, and we kind of like help each other out, right? Well, that's not always the case, all right? And I have to say that really bothers me. That, I'll take a step towards someone else, a stranger, or like even a friend that's making music or whatever. I'll step up and I'll comment and I'll engage their content and try to help them out a little bit, even if it's just liking something or making a comment or something like that, right? Very simple, doesn't take much time. And, most of the time I'm genuinely interested in what they're doing, And even if I weren't, I would at least give them the time of day, right? And I would subscribe, or I would like it, or I would comment, or something like that, right? A good example of that is my friend Eric, okay? He has a YouTube channel, Lutherville. I have a YouTube channel, and we both kind of help each other out, He'll watch my stuff, he'll comment, he'll like, whatever, dislike even, I don't care. And I'll do the same for him. Now, there's a sense of like obligation in a way, okay, but that's not what it's all about, because I genuinely care about him and what he's doing and what he's creating, and I'm interested in it. So of course, I'm going to reach out to him and he reaches out to me, right? Reciprocity. I scratch your back, you scratch mine. One hand washes the other, however many cliches you want to throw at it. But nothing will turn me off faster to someone who's an artist, musician, whatever. Nothing will turn me off faster than when they don't practice reciprocity. Okay? I find it to be rude. It's not courteous. It's not the proper decorum, If I engage your content, you should at least listen to mine a little bit, okay? Not so much. That doesn't happen as often as at least I think it should, okay? And that's all I'm going to say about it, but it just kind of pisses me off, Now, let's see. My final topic that I'm going to hit you with today, okay? Take a sip of coffee here. Final idea here that I want to share today is a story about my brother Steve. Now, this story that I'm going to tell you is also one of the Singularity podcasts that I made, back in September or whatever, that I decided to not share because, it was a little negative and a little personal, okay? Like a little too personal, which normally wouldn't really slow me down, but it just was a little too much, okay? Anyway, so the point that I was getting at with this singularity that I didn't share with you, okay, that I will share with you now, is that, if you've listened to this podcast for a while, you know that I've talked about my brother a lot, okay? I've told you a lot of stories about him and how funny he is and everything. Well, the last time when we were visiting Cleveland in September, it was status quo, business as usual, telling Steve stories, laughing or whatever. However, this time, okay, I kind of sensed from Steven, okay, who is now probably 50 years old. Okay, he's 50 years old. He's not a kid anymore. And in this process of visiting and doing the remember when and laughing and all this, telling Steve stories, I kind of got the impression from him that like the joke wasn't funny anymore to him. And I think even though he would never say it or admit it or whatever, I think there's a part of him that's kind of like sick of it, okay? And I understand that, okay? Like, it's funny to me, it's funny to my family members, but it's not so funny to him anymore, okay? To be the butt of a joke or to be, something to be laughed at all the time. Because, in all honesty, Steven, as goofy and as silly as he is really actually a pretty serious guy. He double majored in college, like I've said before. In my podcasts, I've talked about that and how hard it was for him to get through college, and he did it, and he finished, and he paid for it himself. He didn't have any help from anyone. He did it all by himself. And, he started 2 businesses. He's self-employed, so he runs 2 businesses. And they're successful. Both businesses are very successful. He's doing really well. And we don't talk about that so much, And when we came home from Cleveland, and my wife and I were both kind of debriefing and talking about the whole visit experience, she kind of pointed out to me something that I had never really thought about before, okay? And it's kind of personal. It's kind of a family thing, but I'll share it with you in the hopes that maybe you can relate to what I'm talking about somehow, okay? My wife pointed out to me, okay, that she found it interesting, okay, that when we get together, when my family gets together and we start to share stories with each other, okay, they usually tend to be like negative or like borderline ridicule, okay? It's all done in the spirit of like endearment and love and affection and being silly and funny, but we communicate to each other in this way, okay? And it's kind of negative, all right? We don't share the positive, happy, successful stories of each other. We tend to focus on and, point out like our idiosyncrasies, and laugh about them, okay? So the long and the short of it is, very seldom is there ever like a compliment, or an anecdote about a great thing that one of us did that was really great. It's always like, remember the time you messed up? Ha ha ha, how funny. That time that you really messed up, okay? And I never really thought about it like that, but it wasn't until after this trip and my wife and I were talking and she kind of pointed it out, and I was like, you know what? You're absolutely right. So, what I decided to do was share with you a Steven story, okay, that's not negative, that is positive, because like I said, he's a pretty serious guy. And there's a lot of success in his life and a lot of really large obstacles that he's overcome to get to where he's at right now. Okay, so it wasn't all fun and games and goofing around and being an idiot, right? And, just as a side note, I did mention it to Steven. And his attitude was kind of like, oh, I don't mind, it's cool, like that kind of thing. But I kind of sensed, yeah, I guess maybe it's not so funny to him anymore. Okay, this 50-year-old guy. So, with that, I'll tell you my positive Steve story. Okay? I'm going to get a sip of coffee for this one. It's a pretty cool story. This one's for you, Steve. Okay? Because I know that you're going to listen to this. I know for a fact, ladies and gentlemen, that Steven will listen to this podcast because he's listened to every single podcast that I've ever done, and he's a very loyal fan of what I'm doing. So this one's for Steve. So back in the day when Steven was graduating from high school, okay, Steven is kind of like, obviously at this point I'm sure you can gather, Steven is kind of like an eccentric personality, okay, which is cool and interesting. He was like an artistic kind of dude, kind of low-key, introverted in a lot of ways, but very eccentric. And in high school talk, okay, eccentric equals, not popular, okay? So Steven did not enjoy popularity in high school. In fact, sometimes it went the other way, okay, where people were negative or bullying him or something, okay, which is a whole separate conversation. But so it was really interesting because when Steven was graduating from high school, he was asked for some reason, by the faculty of the school or whoever was in charge of, picking the speech writers for the commencement ceremony, his graduation ceremony. Steven was asked if he would write a speech and read a speech at his commencement. And he said yes. Okay. Now you would think that it would be like, this story of Steven going off the handle or doing something silly or doing something stupid. But let me tell you, okay, because I remember this like it happened yesterday. Okay, it's still very vivid in my mind. Okay, we were at the commencement, right? And Steven, walks up to the microphone, or walks up to the podium, right? And he delivers this speech. And it was really quite amazing because, well, not only was it written very well, okay, because Steven is a very good writer, but he's also a very good orator, okay? And when he did this speech, when he delivered this speech at his commencement, it was amazing, okay? It was amazing. And when he finished his speech, it was like so passionate and so empowered, the crowd gave him a standing ovation, okay? Everybody in the entire auditorium stood up and were just applauding, standing ovation for my brother and the speech that he just delivered. This weird kind of freaky dude, on the fringe, he steps up to the microphone and he just rocked that auditorium, so much so that the next day when I went back to school, okay, I had faculty members from my school, I had students that were there coming up to me and telling me how my brother just nailed that speech. That was amazing. He just did such a great job. And I'll never forget it, I'll never forget it. It was one of those times when I realized that this guy, who I thought I knew really, really well, okay, I thought he was like silly and funny, and goofy, right? He showed me a side of him that was very serious, deadly serious, as serious as a heart attack, and not goofy, not silly. He could be a very powerful person when he really needed to be. And like I said, I'll never forget it. Never forget it. So that one's for you, Steve. And I guess with that, I'm going to sign off here. I'm going to give you a longer Singularity today. A little bit longer than usual. Trying a couple of new things here. But not sure when I'm going to give you another Singularity podcast. I'll try to do one before too long, but until then, happy holidays. If I don't do one before Christmas, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and all that. I'll probably do something before then, but anyway, you know what I mean. For now, this is Mike Bostwick from Pipe Choir Records signing off. And remember, folks, if you want to keep what you've got to give it away. Take it easy.